Meanwhile, Harry, Philip, and Eleanor were meeting at the library. Someone had spread a rumor that Patrick Harvey had begun an alliance with Sandy Ulrich and Chauncey Barlow, and Harry was determined to get to the bottom of the story. He saw Patrick and the other boys standing in front of Hagrid's house. Harry's suspicions flared. Was this the clandestine meeting to solidify the rumored alliance? His mind raced with possibilities. He nudged Philip and Eleanor, his keen green eyes fixed on the unsuspecting trio. "Let's go see what Patrick Harvey's up to," he muttered, a determined glint replacing his usual amusement. With a sense of purpose, Harry took the lead, his friends following closely behind, ready for whatever they might find. Patrick looked up and saw Harry, Philip, and Eleanor approaching him, Sandy and Chauncey. Patrick's surprise was evident. "Hey, Harry," he greeted cautiously, his voice laced with suspicion that mirrored Harry's own. "What's going on? Everything all right?" The unexpected encounter cast a shadow of uncertainty over their intentions. Had they overheard something? Were they here to confront him about the rumors? Patrick subconsciously shifted his gaze towards Sandy and Chauncey, a silent question hanging in the air. Their body language mirrored his unease, hinting at a shared concern about Harry's sudden appearance. Sandy, ever the pragmatist, nudged Chauncey with a look that seemed to say, "Let's hear what they have to say." The atmosphere crackled with unspoken tension as they waited for Harry's response. Harry said, "I've been hearing rumors about you joining up with Sandy and Chauncey." Patrick's jaw clenched. "So what if I am?" he snapped. "You already know about the fight I had with Ron and Hermione, and frankly, I'm looking for some new friends, because those two apparently betrayed me. Sandy and Chauncey haven't exactly been showering me with kindness, but at least they haven't been gossiping behind my back." A flicker of anger sparked in Harry's eyes, but it was quickly replaced by understanding. He could relate to feeling ostracized, especially after his brief experience with the Dursleys that summer before he came to Hogwarts. "Look, Patrick," he said, "I don't really know you as well as I would like, but we've gotten through some things together, haven't we?" Patrick hesitated, his bravado faltering slightly. "Yeah, I guess," he mumbled, scuffing his shoe against the ground. Seizing the opportunity, Eleanor stepped forward. "We heard the rumors too," she admitted, "but honestly, Patrick, none of us really believed them. You wouldn't just abandon your friends like that, would you?" Patrick looked at each of them in turn, a mix of emotions swirling on his face. Betrayal, anger, and a flicker of something that might have been hope. He opened his mouth to speak, but before he could get a word out, a booming voice echoed through the grounds. "What's all this commotion?" Hagrid boomed, his large frame filling the doorway behind them. "Shouldn't you lot be studying for Professor Flitwick's quiz? Unless," he added with a wink, "you've got a better use for those herbology textbooks." "Well, we're trying to clear up something with Patrick," Philip said as he faced Hagrid. "He had a fight with Ron and Hermione a while ago, and now he's not friends with them anymore." "I'm sorry to hear that," Hagrid said as he stared at Patrick. "It's quite unsettling to know that friendships can crumble faster than a poorly concocted shrinking solution," Hagrid rumbled, his voice laced with a hint of disappointment. He eyed each of them in turn, his bushy eyebrows furrowed. "Friendships are like magical creatures, ye see. They need tended to, nurtured with trust and understanding. A good spat can happen now and again, like a hippogriff molting its feathers, but if something more serious is festering, it needs addressing before it becomes a permanent rift." Patrick shuffled his feet, avoiding Hagrid's gaze. Shame radiated off him in waves. Eleanor, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, took charge. "We were just trying to see if there was any way to find out what's going on between Patrick and Ron and Hermione," she explained. "We overheard some rumors about him joining forces with Sandy and Chauncey and well." Her voice trailed off, unsure how to articulate their suspicions. Hagrid chuckled, the sound like a rockslide in a distant quarry. Ah, those blasted rumors. They spread faster than a colony of doxy gnats in a poorly maintained greenhouse. Sandy and Chauncey. Now that's a right pair, those two. More interested in themselves than building strong bonds. He clapped Patrick on the shoulder, a gesture that could have easily knocked the wind out of a smaller student. Don't go jumping into alliances out of spite, lad. True friends stick by each other, even when things get rough. Now, why don't you lot tell me what this fight with Ron and Hermione was all about? Maybe Hagrid, the keeper of secrets and soother of beasts, can offer some advice on mending fences. Chauncey didn't skip a beat. He said, I know that Ron and Hermione had been trying to dominate Patrick, trying to force him to be someone he wasn't supposed to be. I take it that you've heard about his outburst. Why doesn't that surprise me? Eleanor said as she glared at her brother. I should have known that those two were nothing but trouble. Eleanor's outburst was cut short by a pointed look from Harry. He knew judging Ron and Hermione without understanding the full story wouldn't help. Chauncey, however, seemed to relish the opportunity to fan the flames. Exactly, he exclaimed, puffing out his chest. Patrick deserves friends who will accept him for who he is, not try to mold him into some Harry Potter clone. Sandy, ever the silent observer, remained stoic, but a flicker of amusement played at the corner of his lips. Hagrid, however, wasn't swayed by Chauncey's dramatics. He let out a snort that could rival a dragon's sneeze. Dominate, eh? Don't be daft, Chauncey. Friends don't dominate each other. They challenge each other, sure, help each other grow, but they never try to take away someone's true self. Now, Patrick, what happened with your mates? Patrick hesitated, his gaze darting between Harry, Eleanor, and Hagrid. He mumbled something about a disagreement over how to handle a tricky situation, his voice barely audible. Harry, sensing Patrick's discomfort, decided to nudge things along. It had something to do with dealing with a threat, right, Patrick? He asked, his voice gentle. Patrick flinched slightly, but nodded curtly. Well, Harry continued, maybe you could explain your perspective to Hagrid. He's seen his fair share of threats, and maybe he can offer some insight on how to approach them as friends, not just individuals. A flicker of hope sparked in Patrick's eyes. He looked at Hagrid, a silent question hanging in the air. Hagrid, in turn, gave him a reassuring nod. Aye, lad. Tell Hagrid what happened, and maybe we can all sort this out together. After all, a problem shared is a problem halved, wouldn't you say? Patrick frowned as he said, well, ever since the Halloween night fiasco, Ron and Hermione have been insisting that we are friends, even though I don't actually like them, and I don't want to be around them. But when Hermione suggested that I was just a replacement for Harry Potter, because he didn't go into Gryffindor like he was supposed to, well, that's when it all fell apart. Hagrid's gruff demeanor softened considerably, surprise flickering in his kind eyes. Blimey, Patrick, he rumbled, his voice gentle. That there's a powerful nasty feeling to be harboring, lad. You don't choose your friends based on house colors or destiny's supposed plans. Friendship's about trust, loyalty, and standing by each other through thick and thin, even when things get messy. Hagrid's words carried the weight of his own experiences, years of forging bonds with both magical and non-magical creatures. He understood the importance of loyalty, but also recognized the need for genuine connection in friendships. His pause was heavy with unspoken inquiry, a nudge for Patrick to examine his own feelings honestly. Seems to me Hermione might have spoken out of turn, but was there any truth to it, even a smidge? Did their friendship feel, well, forced on your part? I would say no, but then that would be considered lying, said Patrick. Everyone else frowned as he continued. I kept hearing Ron saying that how he was supposed to be friends with Harry Potter, and that I'm a poor second to him. Plus, Hermione keeps yelling at me for not being able to do magic, when she's constantly making everyone feel bad, because she's smarter than them. Sorry, dude, but I'm going to have to stop you right there, Chauncey said to Patrick. He then said to Harry, is this what you want? Do you want to deal with a person who fawns all over you and another person yelling at you and everyone else for not being smart? Are you a Gryffindor or a Ravenclaw? Chauncey's interruption created a fresh wave of tension. Harry, his green eyes flashing, felt his temper simmering just beneath the surface. Hagrid, ever the wise peacekeeper, boomed, his voice firm but kind. Hold on now, Chauncey. Let's not make assumptions. There's two sides to every story, and yelling won't solve a thing. He gently nudged Patrick to continue, his gaze lingering on the boy with a mixture of concern and understanding. Carry on, lad. What else did Ron say? Oh, I already know the answer to that question, since I'm technically in Gryffindor, Chauncey snapped. Ron keeps telling Patrick that he's nothing but a replacement for Harry Potter, as if Harry can even be replaced. And don't even get me started on what I hear Hermione telling Patrick, it's not very nice. I knew it was too good to be true when I learned that you were sorted into Gryffindor, Eleanor said as she stared at her brother. These Gryffindors always insult anybody who isn't brave and reckless like them, and you are not brave and reckless, not when you consistently avoid people like that. Eleanor's cutting remark hung heavy in the air, threatening to reignite the brewing argument. Hagrid, with his years of experience mediating squabbles between magical creatures, knew this approach wouldn't solve anything. Enough now, he boomed in a voice that, while firm, held a hint of amusement. This bickering won't solve anything. We need to hear all sides of the story first, then we can figure out the best way to mend things. His gaze settled on Patrick, who stood fidgeting with his robes, his face flushed with a mixture of anger and embarrassment. Hagrid's gruff demeanor softened slightly. Go on, Patrick, he encouraged gently. Let's hear what Ron and Hermione actually said. I believe that Chauncey said what I was going to say, said Patrick. Ron and Hermione don't like me, because I'm not Harry Potter, and I'm never going to be Harry Potter. Hagrid's gaze swept over the faces around him, each reflecting a different emotion, surprise, anger, and a flicker of dawning realization. He knew this wouldn't be an easy conversation, but perhaps it was a necessary one. With a deep breath, Hagrid spoke, his voice gruff but kind. All right then, let's unpack this a bit, he said gently. Seems like there's a lot of hurt feelings and misunderstandings swirling around here, like knots in a poorly tied shoelace. Patrick, lad, friendships aren't about replacing anyone. True friends appreciate each other for who they are, not who they're supposed to be. It sounds like there's been a lot of pressure on you, and that's certainly not the foundation for a strong bond. Hagrid paused, his eyes twinkling with an unspoken wisdom. Ron and Hermione, well, they acted out of line too. A friend wouldn't make you feel like you're just a shadow, or a second choice. They need to understand how their words affected you. He shifted his weight, his gaze lingering on Ron and Hermione, who would likely face his disappointment later. Friends are supposed to build each other up, not tear each other down. Think about how you would feel if someone was constantly comparing you to another person, especially a famous one like Harry, he said, his voice tinged with a hint of reproach. He looked at each of them in turn, his expression firm but fair. Listen, all of you. Friendships take work, just like magical creatures need tending. There's gonna be misunderstandings, disagreements, and even fights sometimes. But the important thing is to communicate, to listen to each other, and to be there for one another, even when things get tough. That's how you build trust and respect, the cornerstones of any true friendship. At this, Percy Weasley showed up, saying, "What am I hearing about my brother? Why don't you ask him yourself?" Patrick snapped as he glared at the older boy. Why don't you ask your pathetic, stupid, Harry Potter worshipping little brother about what he really thinks of poor little worthless Patrick Harvey? Percy's arrival, stiff as ever and impeccably groomed, added a new layer of tension to the already fraught situation. Harry, Philip, Eleanor, Chauncey, and Sandy gasped in shock. Hagrid, ever the mediator, let out a sigh that ruffled the leaves on the nearby bushes. Now, Patrick, he rumbled, his voice laced with a gentle reprimand. There's no need for such harsh words. Let's all calm down a bit before things get out of hand. Percy, however, bristled at Patrick's outburst. His nostrils flared, and he adjusted his prefect badge self-righteously. Mr. Harvey, he began, his voice dripping with disdain, perhaps you should dash. Don't you dare, Mr. Harvey me, Weasley. Patrick interrupted, his face flushed with anger. Like you care what I have to say. You probably think the same way as your precious little brother. The air crackled with hostility. Chauncey and Eleanor stared at each other while Philip had a blank look on his face. Ouch! Sandy said to Harry. Not even I would dare act like that. Like how? Self-righteous, said Chauncey. Oh boy, said Harry. Somebody's about to get in a lot of trouble. Before another word could be exchanged between Percy and Patrick, Harry stepped forward, his voice surprisingly calm. Percy, let's hear Patrick out first. There seems to be a misunderstanding. Percy's gaze flickered between Harry and Patrick, his usual arrogance momentarily shaken. He hesitated for a beat, then straightened his robes and nodded curtly. Very well, Potter. But I expect an explanation for all of this commotion. Hagrid, seizing the opportunity to regain control, clapped his large hands together. All right. Settle down, everyone. Why don't we all head inside? I've got some leftover treacle tart that's just begging to be eaten. Maybe with a full stomach and a warm drink, we can all have a civil conversation. His suggestion hung in the air for a moment, then slowly, nods of agreement began to appear. Even Percy, after a moment's consideration, seemed to accept the truce. As they all turned to head back towards the castle, Patrick hesitated, his anger simmering beneath the surface. Fine, he muttered, kicking a small stone across the ground. But I'm not making any promises about what I'm going to say. With that, the group followed Hagrid back inside, the mystery of the fractured friendship far from resolved, but at least a fragile peace established for the time being. The next day, a lot of tension was hanging in the air in the Great Hall. Harry looked around and saw a few Gryffindors glaring at him while the rest of the Gryffindors stared at him nervously. Everyone else, including the teachers, was staring at the Gryffindors. As the tension hung heavy in the Great Hall, Eleanor cleared her throat, her voice gaining a touch of defiance. Before we jump to conclusions about what's going on with Patrick, she began, there's something you all need to hear. She shot a pointed look at Ron, who seemed to shrink under her gaze. My brother Chauncey has autism, Eleanor explained, her voice calmer now, but laced with a firmness that demanded attention. And yes, all of the Gryffindors haven't exactly made him feel welcome. Maybe it's because he isn't the typical Gryffindor mold, a bit more reserved than most people. A murmur of surprise rippled through the hall. Many students, Harry included, hadn't known about Chauncey's condition. Suddenly, his social awkwardness and tendency to gravitate towards Slytherins made more sense. Given the rivalry between Gryffindor and Slytherin, Eleanor continued, it's no wonder everyone's on edge. Here's a Gryffindor spending most of his time with Slytherins, and even the Slytherins seem to have accepted him. It disrupts the status quo, you see. Harry nodded slowly, a new understanding dawning. He'd never stopped to consider things from Chauncey's perspective. That's interesting, he admitted quietly, his gaze fixed on the long table where alone Chauncey sat, oblivious to the sudden shift in attention. I never thought about it that way. Perhaps you should have thought about that when you chose Ravenclaw over Gryffindor, Ron snapped as he and Hermione faced Harry. You were supposed to be. Ron's outburst shattered the fragile peace that had settled in the Great Hall. Murmurs erupted as students craned their necks to witness the unexpected confrontation between Harry and his former best friends. Harry's expression hardened, the anger simmering beneath the surface finally bubbling over. Supposed to be what, Weasley? He demanded, his voice laced with a dangerous edge. Supposed to blindly follow in my parents' footsteps. Supposed to be another Gryffindor golden boy for you to hero worship. Hermione, ever the voice of reason, tried to intervene, placing a placating hand on Ron's arm. But Ron swatted it away dismissively. No, Hermione, let him hear it, he barked. He needs to understand the weight of his decision. Harry's jaw clenched tight. The sting of Ron's accusations was amplified by the disappointment he saw flickering in Hermione's usually warm eyes. He had hoped that they would understand that he wasn't meant to be in the same house as they were, not as long as they persisted in him being a part of Gryffindor. Loyalty isn't about house colors, Ron, he finally said, his voice surprisingly steady despite the roiling emotions within him. True friends celebrate each other's choices, not hold them hostage to tradition. His words hung heavy in the air, echoing through the stunned silence of the Great Hall. Students exchanged uneasy glances, a seed of doubt planted in their minds. The carefully constructed hierarchy of Hogwarts houses, where bravery and loyalty were seen as Gryffindor's exclusive domain, was being subtly challenged. Harry's defiance resonated with those who felt ostracized or misunderstood within their own houses, sparking a flicker of hope for a more inclusive future. Just then, Hermione said, "Never have I ever thought that the great Harry Potter would defy his destiny and be with people who he isn't supposed to be with." Hermione's outburst sent a fresh wave of tension through the Great Hall. Here was the brightest witch of their age, the embodiment of logic and reason, clinging to an antiquated notion of destiny. Disappointment clouded Harry's eyes. "Destiny," he repeated, his voice laced with disbelief. "Is that what this is all about? Friendship for you boils down to me fulfilling some God's bedamned prophecy." He scanned the faces around him, his gaze lingering on the students, who didn't quite fit the mold of their respective houses. A small smile touched his lips, a hint of defiance glinting in his emerald eyes. "Maybe destiny isn't set in stone," he said, his voice ringing out through the hall. "Maybe friendship is about finding those who accept you for who you are, not who they think you're supposed to be. Maybe," he added, his voice dropping to a softer volume, but no less impactful, "true bravery lies in forging your own path, even if it means breaking away from tradition." A ripple of murmurs traveled through the student body. Harry's words resonated with a truth that transcended house colors and ancient prophecies. Perhaps, there was more to friendship and belonging than blind adherence to the status quo. The seeds of change, small but potent, had been sown. As Harry's passionate speech echoed through the Great Hall, a collective gasp sliced through the tension. Heads swiveled towards the source, Draco Malfoy, the epitome of Slytherin pride, leaning back in his chair with a smirk. "I hate to say it, Potter," he drawled, his voice dripping with mock sincerity, "but you're right. Forcing friendships, based on house colors, is nothing more than a recipe for resentment." Besides, his eyes gleamed with a hint of mischief, "who says that friendships can't blossom between houses? It adds a bit of spice, wouldn't you agree?" A stunned silence descended upon the hall. Had they just heard Draco Malfoy, the embodiment of Slytherin purity, endorse inter-house friendships? The air crackled with confusion and a flicker of something that might have been hope. Was this a new era of understanding dawning at Hogwarts? Suddenly, a smattering of applause erupted, hesitant at first, then growing in volume. Students from all four houses exchanged tentative smiles, the seeds of rebellion against the rigid house system taking root. Even the ever-stoic prefects seemed taken aback by Malfoy's unexpected support of Harry's message. Professor McGonagall, who had silently observed the entire spectacle from the head table, rose, a hint of a wry smile playing on her lips. "Well, Mr. Potter," she addressed Harry, her voice laced with amusement, "it seems you've stirred quite the cauldron today. While fostering inter-house unity is a noble aspiration, let's not forget the value of healthy competition within the house system." Her gaze swept over the hall, taking in the bewildered faces. "Perhaps," she continued, a twinkle in her eye, "a more respectful form of competition is in order. One that celebrates the unique strengths of each house. How's about no?" Willa's voice, sharp and unwavering, sliced through the newfound optimism like a sword. The murmur of agreement died down as all eyes turned towards the unexpected challenger sitting at the Hufflepuff table. Even Professor McGonagall seemed taken aback, a flicker of surprise flitting across her usually composed face. "What did you say? How's about no?" Willa repeated, her gaze sweeping over the awed and confused students. "This whole house competition business is nothing but another glorified sorting ceremony that continues throughout our entire education. Gryffindors praised for their bravery, Ravenclaws for their wit, Hufflepuffs for their loyalty. It's a system that labels us and limits us and tears us apart." Her voice rose in volume, her words echoing through the vast hall. A few students, particularly those who felt like they never quite fit in with their houses, began to nod in agreement. The carefully constructed hierarchy of Hogwarts, once thought untouchable, was being openly challenged. "We are more than just our house colors," Willa declared, her voice ringing with conviction. "We are individuals, each with our own strengths and weaknesses. Shouldn't we be celebrating those differences, learning from each other, instead of constantly competing against each other?" A tense silence followed. Willa's words hung in the air, a spark of rebellion igniting within the hearts of many students. The carefully crafted narrative of house pride, once seen as a cornerstone of Hogwarts, was starting to crumble under the weight of her logic. Professor McGonagall, ever the shrewd leader, knew this was a moment that demanded a thoughtful response. Her gaze flickered towards Harry, then to Draco, and finally settled on Willa, a thoughtful glint in her eyes. The future of Hogwarts, it seemed, was far from certain. Especially if the students created an unexpected alliance and decided to stand against the status quo.